we would like to welcome Diamond Harges, who is the founder at the Learning Tree in Indianapolis, Indiana. Diamond is going to provide you all with a keynote presentation titled Sawubona, Identifying Value and Celebrating Possibilities in Neighborhoods. Diamond is a faculty member of Asset-Based Community Development Institute, a community organizer, creator of the Learning Tree, and board member of the Grassroots Grantmakers Association Board. He has been featured in a new documentary entitled The Antidote on Kindness in America, and is a frequent speaker on asset-based community development in secular and religious groups around the world. The bulk of Diamond's work is based on the principles and practices of the asset-based community development that brings neighbors and institutions together to discover the power of being a good neighbor. And I think it's so fitting that he's speaking during our award dinner when we've just had an opportunity to celebrate the great things people are doing and the power of community members coming together to do great work in our neighborhoods. So without further ado, can we please welcome DM to the spot, I guess. It's not the stage, to the place.
Thank you. I laugh every time I hear my introduction. Literally, I just grew up in South Bend, Indiana, and my parents came from the projects. We didn't have a lot of money, but what we did, we were wealthy in currency. The currencies of stories and currencies of abundance. So I'm going to read a little bit. A couple years ago, Dr. Vivek Murthy, our Surgeon General, was doing some work around social isolation. It's one of his big things. Is thinking, how do we cultivate a sense of belonging? And they called me up, and I thought it was a fake email, and I saw, and I sent it to my friend, and I was like, dude, is this the real Surgeon General in Washington, D.C.? He said, yeah, that's the real Surgeon General. So we get on the phone with the guy, and his team said they were coming down, and they wanted to know, what does it mean to belong? And the first thing that I said to them was that you have to be seen. So I'm going to start off reading the first paragraph of an article that just got published, and I think it'll be out in January. The title of the article is Sawubona. To belong, you have to be seen. So I wake up every fall morning to look out of the window to see a giant sugar maple tree, towering above the upper level of my bedroom window. The tree is ablaze with hues of red and gold. It is a visible sign of where God is spreading abundance in the world, even when I don't feel like it. I start there because my grandfather, when my mother was a young child, in these projects, no matter what was going on around them in the 40s and the 50s, that he would gather around this tree he planted. He was a tree planter. Worked at Studebaker for a time and couldn't keep a job down, but he loved planting trees. And they called him Uncle Buck. And when they would gather around this tree, my grandfather was like a professor, right? People wanted to come learn from him. But it wasn't just him alone. That him, his neighbors, his friends, as they gathered around the tree right before people left, he reminded people that life is abundant. So, reason that I laughed about my, resume or whatever it is, I laughed, but I never graduated from high school. I say that to say, to be a change maker, you do not have to have all the accolades or the credentials. For those who are going to school, I'm going to tell you, I have a son that has a PhD in molecular biology. He is way smarter than I ever be. I have a daughter, even though my son messes with molecules, my daughter is 22 years old and she moves them. She texted me on my way up to Fort Wayne from Indianapolis, where I live in my little neighborhood, where people don't have deep pockets, to remind me to reach back to my ancestors, right? Because I'm struggling with seeing what my grandfather was seeing. We own a city block in our neighborhood, and we're struggling to figure out how we're going to raise this $24 million. We got to put a credit union there. We got 80 units of affordable housing. We got a bar and a restaurant. How does this happen? Well, I'm going to take y'all back a little bit. I won't take you back to the 50s, but I'm going to take you to 2004. So my daughter was 1. I moved from the west side of Chicago. We ended up landing in this neighborhood that everybody called bad. It was known for the police runs. It was known for how many drug deals went down. But what it was never known for is all the geniuses there. Because all we focused on is what people didn't have. And as I walked the street, I was unemployed. My wife got a good job, and it was cheaper for me to stay home and be a dad. But as I would walk up and down the street, I had started to discover about the narrative that wasn't told about neighbors. So I ended up at this church down the street, where now my best friend in the whole world was there at a Protestant church, a United Methodist church, and he saw something in me. He said, "How would you like to get paid for what you already do?" It blew my mind because I actually needed the money. He paid my salary, and my job title is what we call the roving listener. And my role was to continue discovering the gifts, talents, dreams, and passion of everyone in the life of the community. Find a place for that gift and celebrate those gifts and get those gifts utilized in ways that cultivate community, economy, and mutual delight. That sounds like a great job, but the struggle was the institutions in my neighborhood would also treat people as if they were poor only. That they also didn't have any gifts. And my job was to train that, to do that, but people in my neighborhood didn't believe it. I would go and say, "What are your gifts? What brings you joy?" And they shrugged their shoulders. 2 months into the work, I said, "I'm done." A friend of mine said, "Let me give you a phone call. I want you to hang out with a few people." Sent me to the Adirondacks. I came back, and one of the big things I learned is that this work isn't to be done alone. We don't do it alone. So I started to go back, and the irony about this, when I said I used to introduce I work for the church, or I got the Community Development Corporation, which each time I said those, they slammed the door in my face. So this time I go back, and my friend introduced me to another neighbor, and they laughed. They all got together on the porch. "Boy, we know who you are. You got that cute little girl." And this is when I discovered the power of being a good neighbor. Gifts started to unfold because we started to learn what it means to trust each other. The other thing is, listening isn't about what comes out of somebody's mouth to somebody's ears. It is being present, looking at what people are doing already. Because the other thing I discovered, just as I didn't know my gift, that others didn't know their gifts. And so we walked through this neighborhood, and a bunch of organizations would do this was in 2006. We were inundated with people wanting to teach us how to grow food. Well, in the first 6 months of my roving around the neighborhood, I found 45 gardeners in the 4-block radius around that church. Surprising, huh? Well, they were all black residents whose families migrated from the South. We didn't think they knew about gardening. we didn't ask. We didn't attempt to see where God was already putting abundance in the world. We were walking over that work. The other thing we discovered is a lot of creators, a lot of imaginators, people who are artistic like myself. I'm a potter and a sculptor. I learned my pottery from people in that neighborhood that was known as drug dealers, known as low wealth people, as known as people looking for handouts. But we changed that narrative. You know, Mary Oliver, the poet, has her advice on living. It said, no, not that one. It's tell about it, and I'm saying it backwards. I'll come back to it. But it is in the space where it's pay attention, be astonished, and tell about it. So if anything that I leave to you today is to be a good neighbor, you should be able to pay attention. Where are the gifts in the world? What brings a person joy? And bear witness to that. A lot of times what we want to do as neighbors is to go out and do something. Well, paying attention is doing something. It's bearing witness to where abundance is lying, right? It is bubbling up and uncovering to make it visible. The second thing is to be astonished. A lot of times we have this in our neighborhoods where we think about competition. This person is doing this, I got to do it better. But none of us are the same. Be astonished of what your neighbors are doing. And then the last piece, the best piece of currency we have on this planet outside of relationships is stories. Tell about it. When the police say you see something, say something. When you see abundance, lift it up and celebrate it. So after the phase of that, 10 years later, I created what we call the learning tree, right? That was the tree my grandparents talked about in 1952. Nobody would give us funding. We didn't have a nonprofit. It was just a group of neighbors and some social capital that I had. I knew that I was very connected. I can go anywhere on this planet and make a phone call, but I didn't know what to do with it. But my neighbors did. They said, if you give us some work, they said, pay us $100 an hour, we'll give you 20% back. And we gave that money out to other residents. So the first year, there was about $20,000. We didn't have deep pockets, but that was a lot for us. And we gave grants out to people based on our philosophy. The other thing is I said, come back to them, well, if I give you this work, you have to walk the neighborhood with me to meet other neighbors to do what I do in your own way. And I was surprised they did it. None of us has jobs. We got one person part of our team. Her title is the cultivator of joy. She only one person got a degree in our place. And because she's smart as a whip. But I say that to say we started to learn things about ourselves and what was possible if we look at what we have rather than what we don't. You would be surprised that people would walk up to my house. It was dilapidated. My 2 children were young, but all these different people from around the world would come hang out with me on my porch. So my neighbors figured out this dude know people. So our first grant that we got is one of my neighbors went and captured $100,000 because they were misappropriating our name. And my neighbor Wildstyle came back and said, hey dude, they using your name, they ain't never met you. Took me to this meeting and they blew up. I blew up. I'm not proud of that moment. But they sent me out and my neighbor came back an hour later. He said, hey, I got a check. He said, what do you want to do with this? I said, what do y'all want to do? And what we decided to do is to live that work. We gave 98% of that money out. And the first thing we did is we found archetypes that were like us. Who in the neighborhood believe in other people? Who's like Melvin? Who's gonna do it because that's what they believe? And we did that. We found what we call healers. My neighbor January. And then we talk about healing, there's a stigma around that, especially in Christianity, where we think, but our ancestors believed in healing. Sister Diane, she came today to give us some exercise. That's a healer. Yeah, give her a hand. Then we look, who is imaginative? Who believes that anything can be turned into lemonade, even though right now it's lemons? Most of the time, those were artists, mostly hip-hop artists, young black men, that made up new ways of people, of them being seen. And then we hired what we call storytellers. Y'all know who they are. To tell the stories about abundance. Because nobody else was telling that story. We gave each person in the neighborhood, through our little run-ins in the neighborhood, we found 45 artists. And we found a bunch of doors during gentrification. And we took those doors and we paid residents to tell their stories. We got 176 doors right now. And how I know stories are important, because remember I told y'all about those police runs? The news would follow the police runs. And so we was always on the news. All of a sudden, I get a phone call because they did a police run, but the news person paid attention. 3-block radius, there are doors on people's porches. I wish I can say I was a genius and came up with that, but I didn't have any place to store all the doors. She called me and I'm like, do not put me on the news. I'm gonna stay low key, I get enough attention. What do you want? And the lady said, you know, we always do runs on everything that's bad, and my soul is crushed every time I have to do a story like this. You and your neighbors are examples of that work. And I scratched my head, I said, can you tell a story about them? And they did. After that of not getting funding, people were requesting, can we give you a grant? Can we do this? But storytelling, you have to lift what is good up. There's enough bad in the world. We have to make abundance visible. And that comes to each and every one of you listening and paying attention to your neighbors. The other thing that I would say in this work, 5 years later, we're trying to figure out, man, we're getting all this attention. My neighbors, my friends are now on the circuit, and I'm an author, and we're still not satisfied. The thing is, what's right here is only right here. You have to take the step up, even if you feel like you can't do it. And we didn't know we can do something, but we saw all these problems around affordable housing in our midst. Man, we're just overwhelmed with the problem. Well, my neighbor January, we put together with IUPUI a summer program, and they fought us on it because they wanted to do a research project. And we said, no, we're not gonna do a research project. What do you wanna do? Well, we wanna hire parents because they're the first teachers to be our summer program teachers. Well, what about this? And I said, well, y'all investing in me, aren't you? I was like, compared to them, I'm like, you don't chop liver. That is who we want to invest in. So January worked with Maurice Broadus and a couple other neighbors, and they came up with a curriculum called Reimagine Black Wall Street. And we hired young people, including my daughter, to walk the neighborhood, to go visit the everyday folks. And I should take a step backwards. Most people in our neighborhood, at a household of 3, ain't making more than $25,000. So I'm telling you, we don't have deep pockets. Y'all know neighborhoods like that here too, right? But you also know people like me, Marvin. The wheels are turning, they're always doing something. And so the young people challenged us, and they said, well, how come I gotta go out my neighborhood to get a coffee shop? And we looked at each other, didn't have an answer for that. You know, 13-year-olds, you said, oh, yeah, you're right. That's how we do for young people, you know. And then they said, why can't we do this? And we told them they can do anything they want in these parameters. So they made a board game. And I wish I do have pictures of it, but I didn't want to bore y'all with a slideshow. They made this little board game, sketched it out themselves like a Monopoly game, but Black Wall Street. 2 years later, that end of that summer, they created a pop-up coffee shop with a partner of ours that was working with young people. And they raised $2,500. They brought 350 people together to raise that. Meantime, us adults in the community are sitting there trying to tackle the problem of people being evicted. We created a community ambassador program across the city. We were trying to figure things out across the city. When that money, I call it Biden money, that Biden money came out, we gave out $1 million of it for people to get money out to stop being evicted. We can clap, I'd like you clapping on that, but that has a ceiling to who we are. So my neighbor Wild Style, his title is the Roving Illustrator. He's one of the best. He is Indianapolis' most known human being. His work changes policy. He came to me and he said, maybe we should be listening to the young people. A few months go by, I built a relationship with the deputy mayor, with somebody that I formerly didn't have a good relationship with, but Wild Style did. And he made us take a walk together. And he said, hey, I'm gonna sign the bond if y'all ever find the land. So I went back and I said, hey, we can do this housing thing, let's go find the land. And we did, we found the city block. Now mind you, we ain't got a dime in our pockets, right? We scrapping to figure out just how to live. And the foundation came, they helped bankroll this project, but they asked us, how are you gonna pitch this? And so I'm like, I don't know how to do this. I've never done a pitch deck. And Wild Style says, no, I know how to do this. Come here for a second. And I walk into a room, the deputy mayor there, another resident, and two of the young people that were there. He says, tell this story, tell this story, tell this story. And actually finished the presentation. What had happened is that the young people created a preliminary design plan for us to capture the $2 million to buy the block. So right now we're looking at a $24 million development. Now, for us, that sent us back into scarcity. How are we gonna do this and how are we gonna do this? But what those young people reminded us is that not only do we have to pay attention, we have to use what we have. And we have to celebrate the heck out of it. So we started throwing parties, not parties at a neighborhood association, parties at people's houses. Then my neighbor said, hey dude, you got a lot of social capital, invite that young billionaire over. Invite the head of the Central Indiana Community Foundation over. And I was like, well, I don't know if I want to do that. Because when money come in and power come in, it changes the dynamic. Well, he said, well, you friends with them, right? Tell them don't come talking about who they are. And their main objective is to come be friends. And I remember throwing a house concert, Brian Payne came in and we had been friends for a long time. He had never gave me a dime. He walked out after that celebration, we got our first $1 million check. So the last thing that Mary Oliver said is to tell about it. You have to celebrate what we have as a collective, right? It is all about what we have. Is there a bunch of things that I don't have? I'm very limited at actually what I can do, but I can do a few things. I can put people in a room and make sure they fall in love with each other. I got lots of social capital because people trust me for whatever reason it is, and I can pick up the phone call on every continent except for Antarctica and get you a connection with. And it took me a long time to get there, but it was my neighbors that affirmed that. It was the people that we call friends affirmed that. So fast forward, my daughter is a junior at Lake Forest, and she just won an award for her research project. And she came back, she called me at 3 o'clock in the morning. And she said, "Dad, mad, little white boy challenging me. Da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da." And I'm like, "It's 3, babe. Can I call you back at 6? But I slept on that. And when I called her back, I said, "Tell me more about the research project." She said, "You always talk about belonging. And you always talking about Sabona. I see you. Maybe the first step of belonging is to be seen." And I say this to you all as you walk out of here tonight. This sounds really good, but this work is hard. It is hard because we forget the essence. We choose vision over essence. We choose the intellectual space over the body. And we choose brick and mortar instead of the love of your neighbors. Help somebody be seen today. Thank you.